Hi, everybody. My name's Daphna Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to tonight's book club. Actually, it's our last one for this year. So please make sure to have your Zoom on a side-by-side view for the best possible experience. I'm so excited to introduce you to our interviewer tonight, Michael Christie. Michael Christie is an award-winning author whose essays and book reviews have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Globe and Mail. Greenwood, his most recent novel, was an international bestseller. It was nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and it won the Arthur Ellis Award for Best Novel. A former carpenter and homeless shelter worker, Michael divides his time between Victoria and Galiano Island, British Columbia, where he lives with his wife. Guess who? Cedar Bowers. And their two sons in a timber frame house that he built himself. So, at the risk of repeating myself, tonight Michael will be interviewing Cedar Bowers, the author of the novel Astra, which was longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Michael will get to them at about 8:45. So, without further ado, I welcome Michael and Cedar.
Thank you, Daphna. That was very kind of you, and thank you for asking us to do this, or asking me to interview Cedar. I guess I'm very excited and scared to do it. Before we begin, I'd like to say that Cedar and I are happy to be speaking to you from Victoria, which sits on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. And for that, we are very grateful. So I'm going to begin with reading Cedar's bio for those of you who don't know her or know of her. Cedar Bowers' first novel, Astra, is a finalist for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize, was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and was named the Best Book of the Year by the Globe and Mail, Winnipeg Free Press, and CBC Books. Her fiction has been published in Joyland and Tattle Creek, and a story featured in the Malahat Review was a finalist for the 2022 National Magazine Award. With her husband, novelist Michael Christie, and their two children, she lives and works on Coast Salish territory, dividing her time between Galiano Island, where she grew up, and Victoria. So we're here to discuss Astra, which is Cedar's first book. It's a novel. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant novel, and one that I got to see begin and happen and develop over time. And I felt very privileged to be in that position. I was trying to think, before this began, of how to describe watching the person that you most care about in the world make a book sort of right in front of you. And it's almost sort of like watching a sunrise. You don't really know when it begins or even when it ends, but it's an amazing thing. So my first experience was when Cedar wrote some stories. And I think that's how Astra began. Obviously when you're the partner of a writer, you're encouraging, hopefully, and you're excited to see someone try to do this incredibly difficult thing. And over time, each time I read it, I just was astounded by the developments that Cedar was making through no help from me, just through sheer craft. And I sort of was privileged enough, I guess, to watch her develop her own sense of her writing and her voice and her storytelling ability and her description. So throughout this conversation, it's going to be very difficult for me to restrain my adoration for this book, which hopefully won't be too annoying for everyone out there. And then also to just, try to get some kind of perspective on this novel, which is very difficult for me to do. But I'm going to do my best, and I'm very happy that Cedar has agreed to let me do this. So before we get into the questions, Cedar is going to read from her novel, a short reading, just to give you a taste of its amazingness, and then we'll dive into some questions. Take it away, Cedar.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, Daphne, and everybody for having me here for this last book club. I was saying before we came on that I didn't know if I was more nervous than normal because it's Mike that I'm chatting with, or less, and I haven't decided yet. So we'll just see how it goes, but I feel like we're sort of on a live date, but it's going to be lopsided. I want everybody to know that normally I ask lots of questions back in conversations with Mike. We don't just talk about me or my work. So I just wanted to start with that. But yes, I'm going to read just from the very beginning of Astra, just to get us started. This chapter, since it is the first chapter, doesn't need much introduction. All I'll say is that it is in Raymond's perspective, and Raymond is Astra's father. Raymond Brine doesn't want to think about the coming baby. He doesn't want to think about it, or about Gloria, or his role in it all. He doesn't want to think about a creature so mewling and helpless, not about its cord, its first cry, or its delicate newborn skin. He doesn't want to think about shared blood, or familial lines, or humanity's relentless compulsion to overpopulate this weary planet either. What he wants to do is work, to toil away on Celestial Farms lands with his comrades under this vast expanse of sky, to focus on soil, irrigation, crop yields, and building more housing for the commune. But this baby is coming as fast as a hurtling comet, and already it's made a mess of everything. Gloria arrived with the influx of spring workers in March, and after a long winter alone in the one-room fur cabin that he'd built his first winter at the farm, Raymond found himself drawn to her quick laugh and broad shoulders, so he let her spend a few nights in his bed. When it soon became clear that she was interested in more, he requested she move into the yurt with the others, carefully explaining that he didn't believe in monogamous relationships, that he treasured his independence, and that he never planned on being tied down. Gloria cited this as the reason she kept the pregnancy from him until June, and why she announced the news publicly during the morning breakfast meeting rather than talking to him one-on-one. After the women finished their congratulations, running their fingers over her small, taut belly and kissing her full cheeks, Raymond pulled her aside to explain yet again that he wasn't that kind of man. Not the kind who got married or provided or believed that A and B led to C. He wasn't going to move to the city, cut his hair, get a job in a bank, or some other bullshit like that. He wasn't going to buy a house or a stroller, because on and on it would go. He'd been called to Celestial for a reason, and nothing was going to distract him or slow him down. If Gloria was hoping he'd build a family with her, or that she'd get a declaration of love, she'd set her sights on the wrong man. Despite Raymond's unwavering stance, Gloria stuck around Celestial all summer long. Sometimes she searched him out by the river or in the gardens, or she bravely knocked on his cabin door to show him the sweater she'd crocheted for the baby, or to update him on the kicks she felt at night. When he encountered her like this, both vulnerable and stubborn, Raymond looked anywhere but into her wide hazel eyes and pointed out that it would be better if she left and got her mother's help. He had no business getting involved with her child. Our child, Gloria reminded him firmly. If you say so, he said, closing the door.
Thank you, Cedar. That was wonderful. So before we get into questions, I just want to remind everyone that there's a Q&A feature to this discussion. And if any questions come to mind, put them in there. And there's going to be a period at the end of this where I will be reading them out and asking Cedar the best of them. So bring your great questions. So Cedar, before we get going, I know that many people who are viewing this have read the book already. But for those who haven't, could you give us like a really brief summary?
Oh, sure. Astra is a novel about one woman told over about 60 years of her life through the eyes of 10 different people she encounters. So you get to hear from family members, friends, bosses, partners, children. And as you read and move forward through the book, the reader is hopefully forming their own opinion about who Astra is and why she makes the decisions she does.
That's the correct answer. Cedar recently bought me this cord for my glasses, and I'm going to be using it throughout the evening, and I feel very dorky.
This is the $1.50 Father's Day present I bought you. So
it's very well chosen, though. I gotta say, I really appreciate it. When you were 8 years old, your parents moved you and them from Vancouver to a piece of forest land that they bought on Galiano Island, empty forest land. Can you describe that experience a little and maybe say something about what it was like growing up there?
Okay, it was a big change, I guess. We'd been living in Vancouver. My parents were pretty active and political. We had a lot of people in our life, and then we moved to Galiano and we lived in tents for a year while they built a small house where then I grew up in from then on. Galiano is an amazing place. It is still where I call, like, it's my home, it's my community. I have deep roots there, even though I think for the first 10 years I was called the new kid, because at that time it wasn't booming like it is now. So I was like the new kid who showed up forever. But yeah, it was a isolated but beautiful place to grow up.
So like in your life, one thing I've always been sort of fascinated by your life, obviously. But one thing that I find really interesting is that in your life, you've come into contact with many people who are raised in like very unconventional ways. And I'm very interested in how those experiences have made their way into this book, not autobiographically at all, but just with respect to your worldview. And so Astra herself was shaped by a pretty unconventional upbringing. What were the struggles that she experiences, and what were the benefits of her way of forming as a person?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's something that we all probably are asking ourselves, like, what were the benefits of our certain home life and what were the things that we struggled with and we had to carry with us as we went on. And it's true that Astra's life, mine a little bit, but Astra's life was pretty unconventional in a very specific way. There's many unconventional childhoods, but hers is one very specific one that is back to the lander child living in the woods of the west coast of this continent. So, and I've kind of always been drawn to people who've grown up in these sorts of environments. I think it's always interested me, partially because of my relationship to it, partially because of my friends that I grew up around, who some of them moved to their parents lived on communes on Galiano Island, and that's where they kind of began. And so it was always around me when I grew up, and it was normal. I didn't think anything was weird about it at all, or not weird, but it seemed just normal, like everybody's home does, until I left home. And I this is the one thing, geographical change, that I did that Astra did, is I moved to Calgary and I got a job in a mall. And so that was when I started to really notice that my childhood was quite different than suburban Calgary's, and ever since, though, I've always been able to pick out people at parties or throughout my 20s. I could always find that often a woman in the corner And we would start talking to each other, and I'd be like, oh wow, you grew up on a houseboat, and or you were born in a teepee in northern BC on a logging camp, or whatever. It was just, we'd be drawn together and kind of have some sort of similar stories, or just kind of like a similar perspective on the world, or what it felt like to move away and to move on. And so I guess, everybody says there's a little bit of you that goes into your debut novel, and I wanted to explore that type of upbringing. It was fun because I got to invent one that was completely original and has nothing to do with anybody that I've ever known. But I wanted to explore children who grew up in such environments and what they have to deal with when they leave. And I think there are many benefits. There's a certain strength and a certain capability that comes from living in the woods or having to make fires and build stuff. And so I find it's usually created some pretty interesting people. But then there's also the isolation and not knowing how to kind of deal with the bigger world that I think people struggle with as well.
I think that capability point that you made is really, really true and interesting. And I remember one of the first times I went to your house, we were eating at in your little apartment, and we were eating at a little table. And I was like, oh, this is a nice table. And you're like, yeah, I built it. And I was like, okay, that's very, very impressive. And so, yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's something that really contributes to Astra's appeal as a character, is her kind of weird resilience and her sort of obliviousness to each situation, but also her kind of power as she travels through the world. So that's part of the book that I really appreciate. Moving on, I've written like a million questions here, so I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm not telling you to be quick. Your answer, I'm just way over prepared for this because I was so nervous. So the structure of the book is unique. It is Astra seen through the eyes of many different people throughout her life, and we don't hear from Astra until the very end of the book. And I remember when I first read it, when you first discussed this idea, I thought it was so brilliant. And it really makes me think about the idea of gossip, and the idea of what it's maybe like to grow up in a small community and sort of know more about people than you would, for example, in, say, a metropolitan area. So I guess Astra becomes a kind of a mystery to the reader, and one that the reader is trying to solve. And how did you come up with this idea? And is that a fair assessment? Is that what the effect that you wanted to sort of achieve with this structure, or maybe some other effect that I'm not thinking of? And just, yeah.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yes.
It's a terrible
is that too
question.
short? Okay. Gossip, yes, I mean, so many people have grown up in small communities, and everybody knows that it is very different. Because I think you were right to say somewhere in that question, you talked about how you're trying to figure out who the characters are in Astra. And I think we're all doing that in a smaller town too. So even if you don't know somebody personally, when you live in a small town, you're hearing stories about them, or you see them walk down the road, or you know which driveway is theirs, and you're piecing together a bigger picture of who that person is, even if you've never really spoken to them. And it's one of the beautiful things about a small town, I think, is this interconnectedness and this sort of really, everybody is a storyteller. Gossip can be used in such a negative way, but also there's something very beautiful about gossip. Gossip can keep people safe. Gossip can cause also a lot of harm. It is both like an evil and a good. So I wanted that evil and the good to happen in Astra. I've read some people's responses where they were like, well, I felt it was a bit problematic that this person is only being looked at through the eyes of other people, and her traumas and her everything are being explored and being talked about through other people's view. And I wanted that uncomfortability, because I think that it says something about how we should be careful about talking about other people, how we should really be acknowledging how much we don't know about them while we do think about others. And yeah, I just have always found, I know what it feels like to know that if I'm out in public, I grew up going out in public and you knew that everybody knew who you were and everything you did would be spoken about and reflected on. And there's something wonderful about that because you're being cared about or people are watching out for you. But there's also something that can make you secretive or it can make you feel like you're being labeled as a certain thing. So I really wanted to explore that sort of theme for the reader so that the reader could find themselves participating in that sort of gossip and storytelling, but then at the same time also be a little bit freaked out or uncomfortable by it sometimes.
I think it's amazing. And I think it has such a powerful effect on the reader. And I think this is why people connect with this book so much, is because, you know, we have all experienced that you hear a story about a person and then you hear a different story about a person. And, you know, you kind of are piecing together this composite view of them. And that's really the only way we know anyone in life. And so I think it's great. So these people who witness Astra and interpret her and judge her and love her throughout the sections, many of them are not wonderful people. And, you know, they could be described as unlikable characters. Obviously, in fiction, there's this big debate about unlikable characters. How do you feel about people really disliking particular characters in your book? And sort of what is your take on this whole idea of unlikable characters?
Yeah, I am on the pro unlikable characters camp in terms of fiction, obviously, since I made so many. And I mean, Astra herself, many people have found her very unlikable. And some of those people who have read it have expressed that that made them not love the book so much because they don't like to read, they want to read about somebody who they can admire in a, like, I don't know, that they can like, care about
sense.
aspiration. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's lots to admire in Astra because I think there's lots to admire in all people as they progress through their life and try to make change and work on who they are and try to become independent. This is the beauty of life. So I find her admirable, though she makes a lot of mistakes. And this, when we talk about the structure of Astra, that was another thing I wanted to explore. I was really kind of tickled by the idea that some people would read Astra and there would be certain characters they loved. And then there would be some that chapters where they'd be like, that person is absolutely wrong. I don't like them at all. And it's not been a game, but it's been one of the best joys I've had when I've joined book clubs and I've been invited like so generously into people's homes in book clubs across Canada. And people, I've asked that question, like, who did you connect with, or who did you really bothered you or got under your skin? And it's always different. The combination is different. Who like there's some clear favorites and there's some clear like, oh, that guy, I couldn't stand him. But there's some characters who people were really divided on what they thought their intentions were, or they really disagreed or agreed with how they were speaking about Astra. And that is something I also wanted. That was like a very that was a goal of mine while creating the structure and while creating the different characters who speak about Astra, was to allow readers to really make those decisions for themselves, and that I wanted people to be in disagreement with each other when they got to talk about the book in a room. And so I'm glad that that kind of worked. But also one last thing about, because I could talk about unlikable characters a lot, is that, you know, when we're children, there's a lot of probably unlikable people, and like you're thrown into schools, you have all your, like, you don't have much control over who you know when you're little. And I guess like part of growing up and aging is figuring out what sort of people you want in your life, who you want to love, who you want to care about. And part of that is getting rid of unlikable characters in real life. And that's good. That's, of course, it's a healthier way to be. Like, this is a positive, but also there's something lost there because we're getting rid of difficult relationships, and we grow in difficult relationships, but they take a lot of time and effort, or they are really painful. So I enjoy that I can have lots of wonderful people in my life, and some that, of course, everybody struggles some places, but that in fiction, I can learn about unlikable people. I can continue to learn about characters that I don't have in my life anymore, and I can learn from them. Or if it's a book that is related to the writer's experience, get to know people that they've actually known. And so I am all for continuing to know and love and understand unlikable characters through fiction. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I so agree with you. And I think like in this book, you've done an amazing job of being like, here's a person who's really sort of sneakily crappy to Astra in a very unique way. And here's another person who's doing it in a very different way, but is also kind of getting their own needs met in maybe a not so sort of generous way. And I think that's part of the sort of intrigue of reading the book, is you're like, each time you're like, ooh, how is this person going to get her wrong? And how is this person going to be a sort of a negative, potentially a negative impact on her life? So I think it's amazing. And I think if someone told me there was a book about likable characters, I would definitely not want to read it.
But I'd also argue that Astra, since she is pretty unlikable, she also is doing things that are hurtful to the people who are telling stories about her as well. So
true.
it is, I mean, I don't think that there's a relationship on this planet where people are only good to each other. I think that everybody is constantly making mistakes and accidentally harming even those who they want to love and treat the best. And so it goes both ways. Astra is a little, like, she uses people a little bit, I think, and she kind of would take from them and then get out and move on to something else and kind of leave people behind as she's sort of trying to learn who she is and what sort of life she wants to lead. So there's kind of like a wreckage that's left behind her as well. Like she's not just a victim, she's choosing to be there, and she's causing harm herself. Yeah. So anyway.
That was awesome. One thing that struck me, I never realized that passage that you read, that when Astra's father, Raymond, is like, she's coming like a comet. And I never really realized that you begin the sort of cosmic metaphors right at the very beginning. And I think it's such a powerful sort of undercurrent through the whole book. And Astra is this kind of person who's in flux, and he was almost like a comet who is flying through all these worlds and through all these universes and all these different people's lives. And she is the narrative sort of path that we follow. And so I guess this is maybe more of a psychological question than you want to answer, so please feel free to refuse it. But do you think like a person is like a self is a fixed thing, or do you think we're more dependent on where, like, the situation that we're in? And were you trying to hint at that with this novel, or am I just making stuff up?
I mean, I don't think that there's a fixed person ever, or like, I think I would hope not, or I feel like it would be a little bit sad. Like, I mean, I guess I will be fixed at a certain point, but then I'll be changing into preparing for death, I guess. So I think like we're all constantly having to deal with new emotional spaces, new environments, new stages of our lives, new people in our lives. But she's definitely a person who's constantly reinventing herself, and she's constantly changing. But it was very important to me as I structured the book that the people who are talking about her are also going through a life-changing event at the same time. So say Brandon, for instance, who's one of the notorious unlikable characters in the book, he wants to shake up. He wants to be better, and he doesn't know how to do it. And then this person enters his life who is oddly kind of tough, but yet also triggers all of his kind of negative behaviors. And so we have these sort of two changes happening at one time. And I think that hopefully that happens over and over and over again. If I think of like Doris, who is like kind of one of the warm heart, like the mom of the book in a sort of way for me, she is dealing with loneliness and what loneliness means. And she is dealing with her own kind of stubborn refusal of Astra, when really Astra kind of shows her that what she needs is to kind of connect more. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question about flux, but I hope everybody's changing, and I think everybody is. Is that?
I agree. You answered my very bad question very, very well, and I appreciate it. Okay, another thing that I wanted to talk about is the antagonist problem. And it's something that I've encountered in my own writing, and I've heard other people speak about, and it's like conflict needs an antagonist. Every story needs sort of a negative force in it, but the problem is finding a good one, and one is not like, that's not like a bad guy, obviously, or a, yeah, so a simplistic antagonist. So I guess my question is, what is the antagonist, or who or what is the antagonist in Astra, do you think? Like, what force is opposing people? Or maybe that's unique to every character, I'm not sure, but how would you conceive of that?
Yeah, I mean, exposing myself, I don't know if I've thought much about the antagonist problem, but maybe I should put some more thought into it in my writing, if that's something that every story needs. I'm learning here, it's great. But my first impulse is to say Astra is her own antagonist, like that she, her main challenge is the fact that she thinks she's not making decisions for herself, that she doesn't have control. I mean, she has, you know this, but she has a dice that she carries with her that was given to her by her father, and she rolls it to answer questions and to make very big decisions about her life. And it's sort of a flaky tool she was given as a child, but one of the only ones she has. So she relies on it for a strangely long period of time. But it is also, it's harming her in a way, because it's making her believe that she's not actually making those decisions for herself. And so I think she is her biggest antagonist. If that's I think that, you know, she's also antagonizes the people who are writing about her. She frustrates a lot of people, and she causes some like tumult in other people's lives over and over and over again. So it goes both ways, you know, because she is the main character. She is the plot. If there is a plot in this character-driven novel, she is the plot, but everybody has their time to be a main character, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it fully makes sense. And I think I remember when you first came up with the idea of the dice, or the die, sorry, that's a singular term. Sorry,
it can be dice, can be singular. I've looked it up.
Okay. I remember at first I was like, okay, like she rolls, like I didn't understand it fully. And then when I saw it incorporated into the book, I thought it was just so profoundly sad that this woman would be sort of secretly rolling this dice to make major life decisions, and that she was so woefully unprepared for living that she would resort to that. And then its connection to her mother and all that stuff. It was just so wonderful. So I think that sounds like an excellent explanation of the antagonist in your story. It's the dice and
maybe
what it symbolizes.
Dice. Yeah, the
right?
Dice is, yeah, sure, like it.
We're solving the book here. Okay, so I don't know how many times it's happened, but I think at least over 20 times people have come up to me and said, oh my God, you're a writer and your wife's a writer too. Um, where is Astra tonight? Is she here? Like, what is she around? And I'm always shocked just by how much people call you Astra. Um, and I guess I just wanted to ask you, why do you think people do that? And like, what does it say about readers or the way our minds work or something? I mean, it's so like people don't call me Greenwood ever, you know, it's just,
Be a terrible first name. Sorry if anybody is named Greenwood as their
hey,
first name.
it's kind of a great one. But so do you think, why do you think that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably two things. I mean, I'm sort of used to being called other things. Our eldest child's name is August. I don't think he'd mind me sharing that. But ever since he was born, people started calling me August because I think both Cedar and August are very gender neutral names. They are both nature names. And so I was always perfectly happy to answer to August because I don't mind being confused by him. I think he's a wonderful person. And so when people call me Astra, I also kind of just carry on. I don't mind. It's happened to me to my face many, many times. Partially just because I'd also be okay with being confused as Astra because even though we talked about unlikable characters, which she sort of is, I also am quite proud of her and the journey she's been on. And I feel like I could have been on her exact path and I would have made similar decisions that she made. So I have no problem being confused by her. But I think it's the hippie names. And then it's also like every reader cannot help but try to place the writer in the novel, like especially in debut books or books that have some sort of kindredship to the life of the author. And like Astra is completely fiction except for the whole Calgary Mall thing, which that story is completely fiction. It was just where it was placed. I just wanted to write about the mall so bad. But yeah, I just think that you can't help, people want to put the author and the characters together, and it's just the way we all naturally think, and you actually have to like work not to think that way when you're reading.
I think you're right. Messiness. This is a word that I think you've used it for, I mean, ever since I first met you, I think you've used it as a word to describe people. That person, we're messy, people are messy, our lives are messy. But you don't use it in a way that's like a negative thing. You use it as a sort of kind of almost like a badge of honor that a person could have. And I think it's safe to say that Astra's life is messy. And so I don't know, I guess I'm asking, did you intend to try to tell the story of a person whose life is messy? And what do you mean by messiness? And what does messiness mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite words. I tend to repeat myself a lot and have favorite words that I just make up my own definitions for, which doesn't work always in conversations with people who don't know me. They're like, what is she talking about? But my definition of messy, there's a messy car. Like there's a messy car with like
Sure.
papers and cups all over the floor. Like we all know there's messiness in terms of the opposite of tidiness or but it is one of my favorite words because I don't know, Astra is a bit of ode to the messy life. People who have had to learn a lot on their own, or who took a more unconventional path, or who were not helped, or who did not have support systems, or who were never given a track to follow, and so have taken longer to figure out who they are, and how they want to be treated, how they want to treat others, what they want to do, what they want their job to be like. I love people who have no idea and who have no clue how to live, but who are trying. And I mean, I partially love people like this because I too have led what I would call a pretty messy life in some ways, in terms of not having much direction, and not like, it always makes me a little bit nervous when I'm around somebody who's known what they want to do their whole life, and their path, or what they were going to be when they grew up since 6. It makes me scared of them a little bit, and then also, and sort of feel a little insecure. But then also I have learned to like reject and embrace the messiness. So I think Astra has this beautiful, like, messiness is beauty. That's my definition of messy. And so Astra has had one sort of messy life. There are many everywhere, where she throws herself at people and situations as a way to figure out whether that's where she wants to be. And then when she says, no, that's not where I want to be, she throws herself into another one. And other characters like Clodagh in the book, who's like a woman who lives on the commune for a long period of time. She's had to live what I would call a messy life because she's been precariously housed. She doesn't have assets of her own. She's taking care of young children completely on her own. And this messy life, she's ready to take care of everybody and move everybody in her van and kind of fight for those that she loves. There's many characters who've lived in, I guess the whole book is filled with messy people. Yeah. And I overuse the word. And if anybody hears me use it in the future, it means beauty to me.
Or like complexity, right? Like, it's like, I've always loved, I've always loved your generosity with which you see people. And I think that is really what is at the core of this book's appeal, is this incredibly gentle and kind of humane way of seeing into all these people's lives, and without judging them, without sort of being superior to them. So I think bring on the mess, and
Yeah.
I think messiness is beautiful as well. So last, anybody who wants to put a question into the Q&A, now is the time to do it. We're approaching the time when I will be reading those questions. So come up with one. Anything we haven't covered yet, go for it. So my last question is, I have it from a good source that you are currently working on a new novel. Surveillance, had you under surveillance. What's it about? Or more accurately, what do you think it's going to be about? And I won't hold you to it. And is that experience of writing this new book similar or different to the experience of writing the wonderful novel Astra?
Yes, I am writing another book. I think I'm trying anyway. I worry after the previous question that it might just be another book filled with messy people. But it's a story of two families, and they live across the street from one another, and they get very entangled in each other's personal, physical, and mental lives. It's slightly love triangle, also an exploration of the time. It takes place in the early 60s of, women's, at this point, women's relationship to men in the mental and physical healthcare system, and their kind of control over their bodies, and how that relates to their partners that they're married to, and how they kind of navigate that through this friendship. That was just
No, that was
I
really
have
good.
years, I believe I have years to perfect that, but that's what
Okay.
I'm going for at the moment. I've been working on it for a while, as you know, Mike, and I'm talking to other people because this is not how I talk to my keynotes, but that's what I'm trying to work on, and it is hard because like anybody, any project, anybody who's done anything creative, you worry that you are never going to be able to do it again. And then the next day you think, yes, this is amazing. And so it's a lot of that right now. Every day is different. And with Astra, I got to write it, I wrote Astra for myself, not thinking I'd ever try to get it published. So it's a bit different this time because I feel like, oh, I could. And so there's a little bit more nervousness, I think, but I'm trying.
Well, I can't wait to read it. That sounds fantastic. So I'm going to dive into the question, the Q&A thing here. Hold on a second. Okay, here's a good one. What was the initial idea for the novel, and how did the novel develop from first draft through revisions to the final version?
Yeah, that is a great question. I believe Mike said in the intro that he kind of watched me go through the process of writing Astra. And I started, I guess it's almost 10 years ago now that I started writing Astra. It was sort of at a period of my life where I just had our second child, and I just kind of felt like it was this chance I needed to take to try something that was like risky and would maybe kind of throw my messy life in a new direction. So I just started with one short story. I've been an avid reader. Books are my favorite thing, but I hadn't really ever considered myself to be a writer, or that would be a possibility. So it really was something I was doing for myself. And it started with one short story about a man whose name was Raymond, and his reluctance to being a father. And then I started another short story that was about a teenage girl who was in that. At some point while writing that story, I realized that this daughter was the daughter of that man. And that's when I kind of they were both terrible stories. And then I threw that away with this idea in mind that I wanted to try to write a novel about one person, but seen through other people's eyes, and kind of get to explore these themes that we've talked about this evening of gossip and looking at somebody and talking about them. And then also somebody who grows up in that sort of environment. So it was, and then I wrote it out of order. It would be like, when do I want to see Astra now? So it was kind of like piecing her together myself, just like the reader does. So that went through a couple drafts. And then it wasn't until I think like maybe I can't actually remember if it was the very last draft before I submitted it, or if it was the first revision with my editor, that I decided I wanted to hear from Astra at the end. So I just wanted her voice, and I felt like people would be craving it. And yeah, just to kind of see her as she's come to her own with her own voice.
I remember when you first said, you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write her voice. It was such a big moment.
And it was the first person. Yeah. So it was like kind of fun. And it was a really good time for me.
Awesome. Not a question, but a great comment. I love your messy description of your new novel, Complicated Lives. Another word for your kind of messy is depth. I think that's a very good point. It is like our lives are deep and complicated.
And everybody's is, even if they are orderly. I mean, there is also beauty in orderliness. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's messiness under the surface a lot of the time. Why did you choose not to have Astra tell her own story until the last chapter of the novel? Maybe we've covered this. I'm not sure if you want to answer that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess it was partially because these themes that I wanted to explore of how do we talk about others. Should we be more careful? We should acknowledge more what we don't know. And the sort of responsibility one has when talking about other people, and then the effects that may have on somebody else. There was a kind of a tool I would sometimes think about while writing Astra, and I know this is impossible because Astra is not an actual person, but I'd be like, what if I handed her Astra and she read what people had said about her at these different periods of her life. And what would that do to her? How would that hurt her? What parts would make her angry? What parts would she have not remembered at all? And sort of, yeah, that was the structure is sort of the plot in a way. So that's why I chose to not have her come in until the end, was because it was that view. And I sort of also would imagine that everybody could have, like Mike could have a Mike book. It would be called Mike. I don't know if that's as good a title. And you could find people who had met him and who he had affected, and it would be a very interesting view of who Mike was. And I think we all would be very hurt and very interested, and I don't know what it would do to us to read such a book. And so it was just this concept. I just like, there were so many questions there. And so I just really wanted to play in that area.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love the idea of Astra picking up the first chapters of Astra. That's so amazing. Hold on, I'm just trying to, I understand, this is an interesting one. I understand it's not by any means an autobiography, but did writing a novel about people with less or sort of unusual upbringings cause you to think differently about your own upbringing or people you knew in real life? Maybe we've covered that.
I mean, I think there's, like, as I've said, there is so many unconventional ways to be brought up. There are so many kids who've lived back to the land. Their families have looked, every single family is very, very diverse and unique from one another's. So I learned a lot about who Astra was and what happened to her. But I couldn't say that it made me learn more about other people that I've known or myself that much. I think it was more because it's so specific to who she was. And there's a few similarities of me and Astra, but not many. And she bears no relation to anybody that I know, but I learned a lot about who she is. But I also have lots of questions about who she is too, because I only got to see these windows into her life. There were other stories that would have fallen in between these chapters. So there's a lot of things she did that I'm not quite privy to.
This just made me think of a question that I was going to ask earlier. Do you feel like you know her, Astra? Like, is she a known quantity in your mind, or is there still a certain amount of haze?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of haze. Like, I knew her in specific moments, or I know how she's affected certain people, but I couldn't say that I know her anybody that I don't know her any better than I know other people that I know pretty well. So there's always mystery, and there's always sadness, and there's always complicatedness in even those people that I love and care about and know the best. There's always going to be things I don't know about them. So I think I know her as well as one could, but we always are missing large sections of a person's life. And I think especially about what people we love have done to other people that's been harmful. Like, that's often something that people don't share as much. And we got to see that in Astra in some ways, but yeah. So terrible answer, but that's my answer.
Great answer. Amazing answer. This one's interesting. How much detail did you create / imagine for the non-Astra characters that didn't make it into the book? Were there entire characters that didn't make it in? How do you choose the characters that made it and those that were cut?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that, I mean, I often think that writing Astra, I don't know how to write yet, but I feel like Astra taught me how to write too. Both are true.
You know how to write.
But like, I got to experience writing from so many different, I mean, it was an exercise. I got to write from a child's perspective. I got to write from many different perspectives, ages, genders. It was a joy to be able to kind of read books that kind of fit those characters, get inspired to think about how one speaks in other people's voices. And I've gone off, now I can't quite remember what the question was.
Characters you cut.
Characters who weren't there. So yes, exactly. And I actually wrote many of these chapters in different people's perspectives. So one example is that for the longest time, the third chapter that's in Clodagh's perspective was actually Freedom's chapter. So it was a 15-year-old boy or 18-year-old boy who was getting to know Astra, and it was his perspective of it. And then I realized, no, he shouldn't speak yet. It's not his time. He doesn't have enough to say. He's going to come later. And I rewrote it in Clodagh's perspective, which is his mother's, which at that time I thought was more interesting and dynamic to think about how a woman who has really struggled herself is both scared for and scared of Astra at that time, and like her influence over her son, and she wanted to be close to her and to be distant from her at the same time. So that happened to a few chapters. That Sativa's chapter used to be in Chris's perspective, who's the fellow that Astra lives with for a period of time. So that was how, I mean, there were so many versions of each of these chapters, and many of them went through other people's perspectives first. But I think that really made me understand those characters became smaller in it, or side characters, but I really knew them very, very well.
I've always been amazed by your ability to do that, to just be like, okay, I'm going to toss this one and rewrite it. And I'm, you know, I have to do it, but I think you do it much more kind of, I don't know, you just so like focused on making the book better that you don't really grieve even. I've thrown up thousands of words in the past, and seriously, it like pains me.
Yeah,
but for
I
you,
love it. It feels like I've cleaned the house. Also, like, or gotten rid of some of that bad kind of, I don't know. It feels very,
I get it for sure.
It's usually like a deep breath you have to take, but I really, really started to enjoy it once I started working with my absolutely amazing editor, who said right from the beginning that no writing is wasted writing, because you're learning about the people more. And I lean into that. And my favorite part of working with her was editing is my absolute favorite part of the writing, is that time where you get to toss. I mean, I'm tossing stuff constantly as I'm writing too, but I love that. That's my favorite part.
I admire you. You kind of touched on this, but maybe how long did it take from initial idea to finished novel?
I think I started writing Astra, that first story that became Astra, when I was 32. I know I was 32, and I'm now turning 42 this year. So, but Astra came out last year. So 9 years, I guess, from initial idea to publication, but maybe we were done 6 months before that. But I wrote it in pieces. And one thing about the structure of Astra is it really lent towards working on just one chapter for a very long period of time. They kind of can be taken apart. The book can be broken up, all like a little bit like short stories. I mean, they're all connected, obviously, and there's the one plot is Astra, but I was able to piece it in for the rest of life, which over those 9 years were busy. So the structure really lent towards my kind of life at that time.
They were busy 9 years. I can affirm that fact. I was there. Okay, maybe one more quick one. How did you decide on the names of the characters?
Oh, yeah, I just really like names. I sometimes this is quite boring, but I find it fun, I often look up like what were the popular names of a birth year. I always like to figure out actual birth dates. I always give each of my characters have an actual birth date and a year that they were born. And so then I decide what kind of family they would have had and how unpopular or popular their name would have been on that list of 1,000 most popular names of that year. And I plop them somewhere in there. And then there's always the thing, you want to balance you don't want to have everybody name something that starts with D, and so I kind of play around with their names beside each other. And I have changed some names too. There's Astra's mom, Gloria, used to be the name of Clodagh's van. So I decided it was too good of a name for the van that she has that she named it. So I have done some name moving, but it's not going to attach to a name. But I usually kind of just go through those lists, and that's how, Astra did not come off of a list. I think that there are some names you could not find on lists, but usually that's how I do it.
Amazing. Well, I guess that we're that went so fast.
Yes, it
I
did.
could do this
Always
all
fun.
day, and I will, we'll probably do this more, in 10 minutes when I see you in the kitchen. So looking forward to that.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Daphne.
Thank you so much, Cedar. Thank you so much, Michael. You are just the most adorable couple I've ever met in my whole life. And Cedar, I mean, just from hearing you this past hour, I hope that you know that you're a writer. You are a writer and a beautiful writer. So I want to thank you both for participating in this, and I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening and actually all year long. I can't tell you, as I just said, how much I enjoyed hearing from you both. For people who were not able to make it, this interview will be available on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days. And so I want everybody to have a great summer. We will be resuming our book club in January 2023, when we will pair the long-listed authors of 2022 with wonderful interviewers like Michael, and I hope to see you then. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Daphne. Thanks, everyone.